Well, this is the week for tax overhaul, with Republicans setting a Friday deadline to get agreement on a common text, giving them time to get it out of Congress and onto the president's desk before the holidays. As part of this push, the president will give his closing argument for the legislation in a speech coming up this Wednesday. Michael Needham is the CEO of the lobbying firm Heritage Action for America, and he joins us now from his offices in Washington. So, Michael, you've made no secret of the fact that you support this legislation, particularly the Senate version. So let's spend just a minute or two going through the possible differences in why you prefer the Senate version. Let's start with that repeal of the individual mandate. And my question on this really is, do you feel this strongly because of tax policy or because of principle that you just don't think the Affordable Care Act was a good idea?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, first of all, I can't think of anything sillier than what Obamacare did, massively drive up the cost of health insurance through all sorts of regulations and then compel people to buy these products, figuring that nobody would want to buy them, which has been the case in many instances. And so the individual mandate is bad health care policy, and it's good to get rid of. It's also something that's been a pay-for a lot of elements of this tax plan and has allowed it to be a better, more pro-growth tax plan and one that can get through the Senate and hopefully the House. So I think it's been a win-win, both in terms of the legislative politics of it, but then healthcare policy and tax policy.
But Senator Susan Collins says that she got commitments to pass the Alexander Murray bill on insurance payments and also setting aside funds for reinsurance. How do you feel about that? Can you be on board if that is also carried out on the sidelines?
You know, I think we'll see what happens with that legislation when it comes forward. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on anything looking like Alexander Murray or any bailouts of insurance companies. So those are policies that will be debated at the time when they go through. You've had other senators like Lisa Murkowski from Alaska come out and very strongly talk about the fact that she doesn't think an individual mandate makes sense. The federal government really shouldn't be forcing people across the country to purchase products that they want to force. That's not the job of the federal government. And so it'll be exciting to see the individual mandate taken out.
It sounds like you're not convinced that those commitments that Senator Susan Collins got will come through.
I have no idea. I wasn't in the room when those commitments were made. I have no idea what they are. Certainly Alexander Murray and bailouts of insurance companies is not policy that we're comfortable with, and we'll take that up and we'll look at that when it comes around.
Well, I'm sure Susan Collins will be thinking about that. Let me turn to another subject here, which is state and local taxes. As I understand it, you very much believe they should be just done away with, the deductions for state and local taxes altogether. At the same time, we talked to Gary Cohn from the White House on Friday, and he had a different view from the White House. Listen to what he had to say.
The House is concerned about their SALT members. There's about 70 SALT state members in the House. We are very concerned about them. No one really wants tax increases here. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, look, maybe we should expand the $10,000 deduction not to just include real estate taxes, but to also include income taxes. The White House is fine with that. If that's where the conferences go and the conference committee goes, we're fine to support that.
So, Michael, the White House is fine with it. Are you fine with the White House, or are you at loggerheads with the White House on this issue?
Well, look, I think everyone wants tax reform to get through, and everyone wants this bill to get through. I thought the most interesting thing that I've seen in terms of reporting from around the country in the last month was what's going on in New Jersey. You have a far-left Democrat governor who was just elected. He was elected on the platform of raising taxes on millionaires. Well, just a couple weeks ago, the president of the New Jersey State Senate, who also is a Democrat, said we're actually not going to move forward on that millionaire tax proposal until we see what Washington does and whether that deduction is going to go forward. You find that in high-tax states, the Republican Party is far weaker as an institution than it is in other states. And I think a big reason of that is that 40% of the fiscal cost of the terrible liberal government policies of New York and California and New Jersey is being carried out by taxpayers around the country. And so getting rid of the state and local deduction would be something that would unleash a fantastic conversation all across our country, and especially in those high-tax states, about the amount of money that our state governments are spending, the amount of taxes that it costs to have that level of spending, and the people of New York should go take it to Albany and get their taxes cut.
So, Michael, you find it to be a terrible liberal government. Is that the federal government's position to decide that for the states, that they have a terrible government they shouldn't pursue? I'm a little surprised at that from you.
Absolutely. I'm from New York City. I'm from New York State, and I think it is absolutely absurd that the federal government has said that taxpayers from Tennessee or Florida are going to have to subsidize 40% of the tax burden of the policies of New York State. People who live in New York, they're welcome to vote for whatever spending they want. They should pay for the spending. They shouldn't get a 40% tax deduction from the federal government that doesn't make them feel the full pressure of the policies they're voting for themselves.
But corporations will still be able to write off these state and local taxes deduction. So how do you justify this to the American public?
Look, I want to have a low, flat tax that treats everybody the same, and certainly this bill doesn't do everything. It moves the tax burden into a much more fair place. But certainly, we think both individuals and corporations should have to face the burden of the tax policies that they face.
So, Michael, everybody, liberal and conservative, wants less taxes. I don't think anybody disagrees on that. The question is how much you're going to have to pay for it.
I'm not sure Bernie Sanders does, but I'll stipulate for the purpose of the question.
Okay, thank you. The question, though, is what kind of deficits you're willing to run up. And we have now a chart here that I'll put up showing what's happened with tax cuts under President Reagan, happened under President Bush, and the fact is the deficit's gone up every single time. We've not been able to pay for it. Why do you think this time we're going to be able to pay for it when we've never done it in the history of the country?
Well, I think there's two totally separate conversations going on. On the one hand, America is spending itself into oblivion. You look at what happens on spending curves a couple years out. We're not going to have money to spend on anything other than Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on our debt. There's no money for education. There's no money for national defense, any of the other priorities that some people want from Washington. That is a separate conversation from the tax code. The tax code is about taking the amount of money from the American people, which we should always be extraordinarily hesitant to do. This is hard-earned money that can be better spent by people in the private sector than government, taking the minimum amount of it necessary in the least distortionary way possible to fund the constitutional role of government. And so we have a spending problem in this country that drives our long-term debts, that drives our annual deficits, that's unrelated from a tax code that needs to be simplified and needs to promote growth, because ultimately growth is what's going to give us the flexibility and the space to get our spending programs under control.
Michael, great to have you with us. Thank you, Michael Needham, CEO of Heritage Action for America. Still ahead.
Thanks for having me.